Hello everybody, Maven here, and I just discovered something about tracer rifles that I'm sure about 99% of you didn't know either. So I was just going about my day. I was about to make a shorts video on how everybody knows exotic primary weapons do 40% more damage to miners than non-exotics, and you would think that wouldn't work for tracer rifles because they're not primaries, but as it turns out, it does work. But through my testing, I found out that it's so much more deep than just that. It's way more complex than I ever knew. So let me try to give you an example of what I mean here. Carl is a mini-boss, he's not a miner, so the 40% exotic rule does not apply to him. So if you take a Quicksilver Storm and a Sweet Sorrow, they're both going to do the same amount of base damage to Carl because he's not a miner, he's not affected by the exotic rule, and these are both 720 RPM hand cannons, they're the same archetype. And if you take the Wicked Implement and the Briar's Love, they're both going to do the same amount of damage to Carl because they're both 180 RPM scout rifles, they are the same archetype. You see where I'm getting at? The same logic goes for every type of exotic in the game. They will never do more base damage than their legendary counterparts of the same archetype unless it's against miners, and that's just how Destiny 2 works, that's how it's programmed. But when it comes to tracer rifles, all of this logic goes down the drain. Even though they are all the same archetype, 1000 RPMs, they all have their own unique damage profile. So if you asked me a week ago what the best tracer rifle was, I wouldn't be able to give you a definite answer because I think they all do right around the same amount of base damage as every other archetype in the game does. But now with this new discovery, we can actually determine what the best trace really is. So let's get to it, and as usual, if you got a second to drop a like and a comment, it really helps out a ton, and I hope you enjoy. So let's begin our testing here against miners. So here I got some legendary traces, the Incinzor and the Hollow Denial, and I even tried more legendary traces, and they all seem to do the same amount of base damage. So I can confidently say all legendary traces are the same, and their base body shot damage appears to be 1353. And now when we try out the Navigator Exotic Strand Trace Rifle, you can see that the base damage looks like it's taking that 40% exotic rule and increasing that body shot damage to 1894. And on to the Aegir Scepter. You would expect it to also follow the exotic rule, but this is where it gets interesting, and you see a dramatic rise as it has a base damage of 2462. And remember, the Navigator only had 1800, so this is where the discovery originally came from. My mind was blown, and I was wondering why the Aegir was doing so much damage, so I decided to just test everything. So with that being said, we're moving on to the Prometheus Lens, which seemed to have a base damage of 1667, but it also makes a pool of fire and also applies Scorch. We'll get more into that in a second. So next is the Wave Splitter, which does even more than the Aegir Scepter at 2505. And then there's the Ruinous Effigy, and I couldn't believe my eyes as it did 2655. It's ridiculously strong. And finally, the last one is the Cold Heart, coming in at a base of 1894, but as you can see, it ramps up dramatically quickly to a maximum of 3407 with its pseudo sort of target lock perk. But unlike target lock, you can actually miss shots and even stop firing, and the Cold Heart will keep ramping up. It's much more forgiving and fast. Now, we're not going to try the Divinity in this video because that's a support weapon. It's kind of its own thing. We're just going to leave it be. So here is a recap of the test against miners. Like I said, I had no idea that every exotic trace did different base damage. I thought they would all act like everything else in the game and be exactly the same within their given archetype, allowing their perks to be the determining factor of what their ultimate damage outcome would be. But it looks like that's not the case. I've used all these traces in countless builds over the years and never realized this. I would have never thought the Ruinous Effigy would do so much more damage than the Navigator, for example. But anyways, let's move on to the major test, or in this case, mini-boss, because that's what Carl was proven to be. So our legendary trace rifles come in at 1453 to the body. And the Navigator also seems to do 1453, so unfortunately it's not coded like all the other traces, and seems to be the only outlier that stays true to the 40% exotic rule and doesn't do any extra damage against non-miners. Next up is the Aegir Scepter, coming in at 1888. And for the Prometheus Lens, there's 1278 with 767 from the Lava Pool and also applies Scorch. Now we're going to have to do a mega slowdown here. And from my guess after analyzing the footage, I think we get 1 tick of the splash damage for every 2 shots. So if we split that number to determine the average damage per shot, it seems to be about 1671 per shot. But this is not counting the fact that it also applies Scorch on Sustained Fire, which just further adds to it. But anyways, we're gonna move on to the Wave Splitter. We get 1921. And onto the Ruinous Effigy, we get 2036, which is exactly a 40% increase. So it's just applying that exotic rule universally to non-miners. And finally, the Cold Heart. The base is 1453, same as the Navigator and the Legendary Trace, but it ramps up extremely fast to 2627. Now, as for the recap, you can get a nice overview of our damage values here. So you would think that the Ruinous is nuts, but if your Void build can create a ton of orbs easily, then the Wave Splitter might do more because of the supercharged battery perk, but we'll try that out in our next test here in a sec. But the Cold Heart seems to be the best for just raw damage output without needing any help really. But now you may have the question, which trace does the best TPS at their maximum potential? So yes, that does count the supercharged battery for the Wave Splitter. That does count the fact that Ruinous Effigy does more damage to targets that were dealt damage by a transmutation sphere. So we're going to do a 4-way comparison here with our top contenders from the previous test. No surges, no loaders, just the exotics alone with their perks. And I will be aiming for the body just for the sake of the damage comparison, because if I try to land crits, I might accidentally land more crits with one trace than another, so it'd be easier to compare if I just aim for the body. And I do accidentally hit a few crits here and there, but it's not much, so it's fine. So we did dunk on him with the purple ball from the Ruinous Effigy, and it's obviously giving us like a rocket's worth of free damage, which is why it kills first, but hey, the perk wants us to do that, so we're doing it. And it seems that the Cold Heart and the Wave Splitter with supercharged battery proc are literally identical all the way down to the frame. The only difference is that the Wave Splitter needs orbs to proc that perk, and the Cold Heart needs nothing at all. It's just strong as is. And the Prometheus Lens, I was seriously expecting it to do way more damage than it did because of the Scorch and potential ignition, but I didn't have Ember of Torches, and that's going to segue us into the next test. So what if we were wearing the Cenotaph mask to steadily reload our trace rifles? I wanted to bring out their maximum potential possible so we can get a good idea of which one is the best when we actually build around it. So back in at Carl once again, and I thought the Cenotaph with Ember of Ashes would make a huge difference, especially for the Prometheus Lens, but turns out the results were exactly the same as before. The Ruinous Effigy again is the clear winner, mainly because that free damage from the ball dunk, and you might think that having to slam the ball is a huge downside of the Ruinous Effigy because you have to get up close, but it's actually not that bad. The Transmutation Sphere turns you into an unkillable tank when you're blocking with it, and it actually heals you. But the best part about it is that it also blinds. So you can slam that ball, blind them, and then just wail on them with the trace rifle and they can't fight back. It works out pretty well. And just like before, the powered up Wave Splitter and the Cold Heart are exactly identical yet again. And if you're building around the Wave Splitter, even if you have a Void build that can confidently make a lot of orbs, there will still be times where you don't have an orb and then your Wave Splitter suffers. Also, if you were killing a tankier target, eventually the orb buff would just run out. So when it comes to damage, I believe the Cold Heart is easily the clear winner because it doesn't need to pull any strings to be insane. And not to mention, it also makes ionic traces on sustained damage to regen your abilities, which is just even more free upside. So to put into perspective of how strong the Cold Heart is, we're going to do a side-by-side comparison against a machine gun, the Commemoration. So you can just see that trace rifles are not to be slept on, especially the Cold Heart. Trace rifles are one of the least popular weapon types in PvE just because people feel like they do no damage, but this comparison is here to show you that that is utter BS. Traces can actually compete. And shameless plug time, but I did do a full build video around the Cold Heart with the Cenotaph mask if you want to check it out. It's actually one of my favorite Warlock builds of all time because it just does so much damage. Every time I use it, my mind is blown because of how hard it slaps. It's no joke. I literally did a damage comparison in that video of the Cold Heart with an Arc Soul versus a machine gun in a Well of Radiance, and the Cold Heart actually won even without a well. It's kind of ridiculous. So after our research today, I can safely say with confidence that the Cold Heart is the best trace rifle in Destiny 2, period. But I will give props to the Aegir Scepter for being the best at group ad clear. And I lost a lot of respect for the Prometheus Lens after this testing. I seriously thought it was way stronger than that, but at least it still has the second best ammo economy out of any weapon in the game, the first being the Hollow Denial. And if you're going to take advantage of volatile rounds, the classic go-to was always the Wave Splitter, but after our discovery today, I think I might actually consider going with the Ruinous Effigy instead because of the far greater base damage without needing orbs. And the burst damage after slamming the ball was kinda nutty, as you saw it easily won both of our damage comparisons. So hey, give Ruinous a try, seriously. And one final shameless plug here before we end it, I did do a recent build video using the Ruinous Effigy that I will also link in the top right corner if you'd like to check it out. Honestly, I could do shameless plugs for a lot of these traces because I've done build videos with pretty much all of them, but 2 plugs is enough for one video. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to drop a like and a comment. Your interaction goes a long way and really helps out the algorithm. I greatly appreciate it. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here. And with that, I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.